to Liberty Unlocked. I'm Don Watkins. All right, so one of the things I've been thinking about for a while, and I still haven't put all the pieces together, is this phenomenon that a lot of my stress in terms of teaching, persuasion, communication is clarity, and in particular, striving to make your communication effortless to consume. But one of the other things that I've noticed, and some of my friends have noticed reflecting on themselves, is that really intelligent young people who are very ambitious are attracted to ideas that are initially over their head, that aren't kind of boiled down and easy for them to take in. And even more than that, if you had offered them something when they were in high school that was written for a high schooler, they would have found it alienating, not exciting. And so these are the kinds of people attracted to, grand scale thinkers like Ayn Rand, where they get the sense of there's something really important here, there's something really clarifying, and yet there's so much that I don't understand. They have the sense that 90% of what I'm reading is flying over my head, and yet it is not frustrating, but is actually attractive, because it's like, all right, I found this treasure that can keep paying off, keep paying dividends if I keep pursuing it. Now, in terms of what lessons to take away from that, one thing I definitely don't want people to take away is that there's a kind of license that, if you're making complicated points, you can be arcane or confusing or something. I mean, if you think about somebody like Ayn Rand, there's this incredible, consistent clarity. But what I do think the lesson is that we shouldn't shy away from making deep points when and as they're relevant. And what you can think about is, like, this isn't about an issue of, well, I'm just going to write a paper on the most arcane issue in philosophy, although you can do that if you're interested in philosophy. But in terms of people who are concerned with promoting liberty, I think objectivists in particular have not been objectivist enough. That is, we've been so focused on making pieces self-contained that there's like a fear to go to deeper issues in philosophy, or you maybe don't call it a fear, but it's just, that there's no way to do that in a way that is self-contained, clear, and convincing. And I think there's some missed opportunities here. And I think, Ayn Rand really is the model. This is somebody who would talk about the most pressing issues and clearly relevant issues in human life, in society, and politics. And yet you would get to the deepest, most complicated issues in philosophy in the course of an essay, in the course of a speech. And I actually noticed this phenomenon back in 2016 for the first time when I first encountered Jordan Peterson. And one of the things that was so striking to me was that, he would be on Joe Rogan, and the conversation, would start off on social justice warriors, and suddenly they'd be talking about, the nature of perception and the definition of truth. And so set aside the quality of his answers, there is this just natural going back and forth between super relevant issues in psychology and the culture and very deep issues in philosophy. And it impressed me, and part of what impressed me is that this was appealing to people, that people were hungry for deep ideas, for ideas that challenged them to go underneath their kind of standard assumptions, to see that there's questions that they weren't even asking that might be relevant to the questions they were asking. And so this is kind of, let's call it postdoc communication and persuasion. I don't think that everybody should jump out and start trying to write articles that are going to, integrate the, concepts as requiring measurement omission with antitrust. But what I do want is for people to feel liberated, to be as expansive and as deep with their ideas as they feel confident in doing, and not worry too much about the idea of, will some of this be challenging? Will some pieces go by people? I think that as long as you're on the premise of being as crystal clear as you can, being challenging can be an asset rather than a liability. And that brings me to this week's discussion with Agustina Vergara Cid. She is a lawyer originally from Argentina and currently works at the Ayn Rand Institute, though I want to underscore here, she's not here as a spokesman or an official capacity as a writer for ARI. We're discussing her story, and we get into some really interesting issues about, the sort of history of political freedom in Argentina. We get into what was so appealing to her about America, even from a young age, that convinced her she wanted to, move to a different country. We get into a really moving and fascinating and outrageous and angering discussion of the state of immigration in this country. And we talk about, some of the challenges involved in trying to build yourself into somebody who can create value in the realm of ideas, particularly if your ideas are as controversial as being somebody who's pro-liberty and specifically objectivist. So before we get to the conversation, just a few reminders. Be sure to subscribe to this podcast, either on YouTube or iTunes or wherever you actually consume the content. And as always, the best way to stay in contact is to go to donswriting.com and sign up for the newsletter. You can also support the show financially at libertyunlocked.com, where every dollar goes to help us improve the podcast and reach more people. Now, on to the conversation with Agustina. All right, Agustina, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Don. Thank you for having me. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, so I've been following your work for, a while now, but I think we first really talked like a month or two ago. And part of what's interested me is just like your whole story and the kind of development you've had in your writing. And then one of the things that really impressed me, so I used to, when I worked at the Ayn Rand Institute, I basically had this policy of how I judged people, which was back in those days, everything was on like CDs and tapes, and all of the old objectivist lectures were there. And so if somebody new came aboard, basically my standard, if they were going to be any good, was did the first thing they do is like grab all of those and go through everything overnight. And just the wider point is that there's when somebody's kind of like early in their career, it's how much are they like taking action, pushing themselves, really striving to grow. And one of the interesting things that I was really enthused to see was we had a conversation a little while back where I said, hey, you should really start an email, like a newsletter, so that you can start, building your audience and trying out different types of communication. And I think it was like within a week you had one. And so I really love that. But let's back up a little bit. So first of all, where are you from?
Well, I was born and raised in Argentina in a city called Córdoba, which is the second largest city in the country. Spent my entire life there basically until 3 years ago, almost to the date, I moved here to the United States. I moved here to pursue a master's of law at USC, and then I was able to stay, which is not something that a lot of people are able to do, unfortunately, but I was able to, and I'm living my best life here in the United States, as I always dreamed since I was a little girl, so I'm pretty happy.
Yeah, I mean, we'll come to that, but definitely there's a few people who, wherever I see the latest like immigration news, my first thought is, oh my gosh, how does it affect these people? And you're definitely on that list. But so for people who don't know sort of what the, last few decades were like where you came from, what's been the government situation there? What politically, was happening while you were growing up?
So Latin America in general has, for the last several decades, started to lean very much to the left, and that conception that most people have outside of Latin America, like in the United States or Europe, that Latin America is like always leaning left, that is true. It wasn't the case upon the founding of many of the countries in Latin America, including Argentina, but it started leaning left for a variety of reasons. But when I was growing up, it was already, in the 90s, there was what people call this neoliberal government.
Uh-huh.
Liberal in the sense like in you know, outside the US, liberal means to the right, as opposed to here in America, which means more left leaning, right? But you know, that wasn't really like true like free market or anything remotely like that. Like it was still like big government, like a lot of government spending. There was, you know, cronyism. It was a disaster, and of course that got blamed as like the country eventually, of course, like came. Like, there was like this huge crisis in 2001, and of course they blamed it on the quote free market, which was never the case. There was never a free market. Um, but when I started getting like when I was a teenager and I started to understand a little bit more what was going on around me, was, you know, I saw the crisis in 2001, which was, it was crazy. Like it was December 2001. There were like riots. It was just insane. Like the policies that were being enacted by the government to try to calm the situation it didn't just make any sense. It made everything worse. It's a long story, but I saw that and it really had an impact on me. There was like lawlessness literally all over the country, and you were not safe like in your own home at that point. Even if you were not like downtown where everything was happening, like everything was happening everywhere, and it was really scary. And I was afraid, you know, for my parents' jobs. And anyway,
What did they do?
my dad was a judge, and my mom was, well, yeah, but she's retired now, was a biochemist. She worked mostly with, you know, in the justice system, you know, when they bring in like people that are detained and they want to check if they have like drugs in their system or whatever, things like that. She was a person like doing that. So, well, that crisis happened, which led to the president back then, Fernando de la Rua, to resign. It was just a terrible situation. We had several presidents in a short period of time there until 2003. We finally had elections, and I remember very clearly the election that we had, and because I was watching it on TV, and that was when Nestor Kirchner was elected, and that name might sound familiar to some because he's the one that started all these, the latest decline, let's say, in Argentina, policies very, very much to the left, and he started really, really using this discourse of, you know, sacrifice, and, you know, we have to do we have to sacrifice for our homeland, and, you know, this redistribution of wealth thing. And from there, it was basically all downhill until today. Like today, Argentina is just, you know, the coronavirus crisis really made it, really exacerbated the authoritarianism, and people are basically, they do not have any rights right now. It's really, really sad what's going on there. They have been in lockdown since March, like strict lockdown. I'm talking about, not the kind of lockdown that we have here. Like they
Right.
cannot go, you know, you cannot walk your dog without a permission from the government because the police will stop you and like ask you for your permission, you know, things like that. And it's pretty insane. So it's a long story. Obviously, there's a lot there, but
No, that's a helpful context because, you know, we Americans are quite parochial. So like, you know, I think it's kind of a blank slate. So that's kind of the milieu in which you're developing your own ideas about politics. And so how did that trajectory start? When do you recall coming to your own first conclusions, and were they similar to what you hold now, or was there kind of a process of changing your ideas?
so for a while there, I mostly, you know, heard, you know, my parents were not leftists, they were not either like very much on the right either. They were kind of centrists, which is a different standard for Latin America than, you know, the United States.
Sure. Yeah.
But basically, for a long time, I was kind of like an observer. I knew I did not agree with the left, but I wasn't ready to take a position like on the other side or even like on a middle ground. I was just like watching in a sense. and kind of thinking things through. Like, does this make sense to me? And when I really started thinking about politics, like when like, okay, I'm gonna form my position, that was when I started reading some political philosophers.
Who'd you start with?
So I'll backtrack a little bit. When I was 13 years old, like since I was a kid, I would go to my dad's office and like he studied, and he would have like this huge bookshelf with like a lot of books that he's read. He, for his profession, he was a judge, so he read a lot, and he loved actually philosophy. He loved political philosophy. But as a kid, I would go and ask for books, and he would give me whatever he thought was kind of appropriate for my age. That's actually how I got into poetry when I was like 6 years old.
All right.
But when I was 13, like I had finished reading whatever it is that he gave me at that point, and he told me, I think you're ready for this. And he gave me a copy of the book Introduction to Philosophical Analysis by John Hospers.
Oh, that's usually right not here. Where people start.
Yeah, I know. I have there are 2 volumes. I have the copy still there. They're like from the 60s or something, and or 70s.
Yeah, and for people who don't know, Hospers was a major figure in the early Libertarian Party. He was friends with Ayn Rand for many years, and they had a really fascinating correspondence that you can read in the Letters of Ayn Rand, which I think now the Institute put the whole thing up on the website, which is an amazing resource because it's an insight into both of into her thinking that you won't get anywhere else. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. And well, I started reading that, and it was like hardcore philosophy. Like I was like at 13 years old, like it went all over my head. I was like, wow, this is really hard. But I actually read it all. I did not understand probably like 5% of what was going on there, but I did get the sense that there was something like bigger behind everything, so that there was something deeper. And so I started asking my dad, and like I forget what I read after Hospers, but when I started, basically I just went on the internet and started Googling whatever, like philosophers, and like I got a couple names from Hospers himself, like kind of like in the bibliography, reading. And then at school, I was in high school, and we had started like studying a little bit of political philosophy. I was in a religious school, so the classes weren't super valuable at all, and my questions were like my requests for recommendations were not great. But yeah, I basically the one that like started making sense to me was John Locke, and I read what I could online, and I tried to read Kant. I remember I could not, like I was like, I can't do this, and I had to read in English. My English wasn't that great back then. And I just, and the one that started like really made sense to me, but I wasn't 100% convinced, was Robert Nozick, which I read probably I got to him when I was 16 or 17, probably around there. So that's when I started like forming my opinions a little bit politically. So, and
aside from your dad, was there anybody else that like was in the same reading space as you, or is this just all like very self-directed after those early, that early recommendation?
It was 100% self-directed. I would talk to my dad like about things that I had read, and like he, like for instance, Nozick, that was too much for him. He was like, nah, that's not right, and this is why. And we would have like our like discussions, not arguments, but no, it was completely self-directed, and even like well, I'm a student of objectivism, and I work for the Ayn Rand Institute, and when I found Rand, I found her on my own as well, and I studied on my own, and I felt like I was the only one in the world, like, or at least in Argentina, that knew her name and was studying her ideas until, I discovered that I wasn't, and I didn't feel so alone,
That's really, yeah, I want to come back to Ayn Rand. I think it's one thing that's really interesting to me is that like, so both of us roughly the same age started reading philosophy, and I had a similar experience where I had always been interested in like philosophic statements. Like I used to take martial arts as a little kid, and like my favorite part was when, our teacher would drop like Zen wisdom on
Mm-hmm.
us. But the first like serious philosophy I got interested in was Nietzsche, and only because I read a biography of Jim Morrison from The Doors, and who was in love with Nietzsche. And I had this similar experience of reading it, not understanding any of it. But interestingly, it like didn't turn me off. It kind of encouraged me to keep going and like try to get more out of things. And it's something I haven't fully integrated into my view of persuasion and communication. But one of the things that I've noticed is true in my case and true in the case of many smart young people is in general in communication, you're trying to be really clear and make it so that, an intelligent young person can take in, whoever your audience is, but like you want an intelligent person who doesn't already know what you're talking about to understand it. And yet I find that with really ambitious young people, there's sort of this aspirational quality where they want something that's like forcing them to go to a different level. And they know I'm not getting everything there is to get here, but there's something valuable. And to me, I don't know exactly what all of the implications of that are, but it definitely seems true that if, on the other hand, if you in effect just tried to give them the dumbed down guide to, Robert Nozick or something, there'd be a lot less interest in that. I mean, there might be if they read Nozick first and go, I want to understand it more. But in terms of their first encounter, they want to encounter a mind that they see is on a level that they're not at yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
So,
and yeah,
go ahead.
No, and I felt that way, and like I liked actually when I would read someone, or even like outside of philosophy as such, when I would read an op-ed in the newspaper and I encountered a mind that I was like above mine, and I was like, wow, this is, I got excited about it, and I wanted to find out more about that person, like what else has this person written, because I feel like there's, even if I don't agree with the conclusion, there's like some like really good thinking behind this, because this is an interesting mind and I want to learn more about that. I want to read more. I want to consume more of what this person is producing.
Do you have thoughts on what, because this is obviously unusual, like most teenagers are not doing this kind of aggressive seeking out of ideas. And I'm curious as to what you think was different about you that just made that so appealing.
I am not sure. I was like always, always felt that I was a little bit different than my peers, like at school and everything. And I would always question things more than, my classmates or whatever. And in fact, like I would actually question things in Catholic school where I was, to the point where they kicked me out for basically asking a lot of questions. That's literally true.
Right, that's going in your biography.
It is. It's on my resume. But I don't know. I'm not sure what it was. I guess observed, like watching both my parents, especially my dad, because he had to work with ideas as a judge. So I guess watching him and reading the stuff he wrote. He was also a writer, besides being a judge. So I guess reading the stuff he wrote and seeing him like grapple with these ideas and thinking, that made me really interested in that. And that's why I started reading. And I found that for me, reading was way more interesting than doing a lot of the stuff that my peers were doing when they were like teenagers, right? I was not interested in getting drunk when I was a teenager, or smoking, or doing anything. I was like, nah, like that doesn't make any sense to me at all. I literally would rather stay home and read, even if it's a comic book, anything. I just find it that's I just found that was a better use of my time than doing all this other stuff. To each their own, right? But
yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. Like I don't have a good sense of what my answer would be. I think I definitely I have vivid memories of like seeing my dad read the newspaper and pontificate about it. And I had this idea of, wow, he knows everything, and it seems really cool to know everything. So I think I had this idea of there's something really empowering about knowledge. And I also had this premise that like I wanted life to be interesting. I wanted my life to be important. And I think probably those two things came together in the sense that like, all right, ideas or knowledge, there's something that really is important about this endeavor. And I suspect that's what attracted me, but it's an interesting question. And it's kind of a route I want to go down with more guests. I mean, we usually focus on like more of the content of the ideas and what was appealing, but I think even the interest in them is so fascinating. Like, what are the preconditions for people even being interested in ideas, and is there a way to activate that? To what extent is it like a, is that a barrier that can be overcome? So what so you're going through this process. What age are you, or what stage is it occurring that you encounter Ayn Rand in particular?
So I was 18 when I encountered Ayn Rand. It was my first year of, I was starting my first year of law school. In Argentina, the system is different. We go straight from, from high school to whatever we choose, med school, law school, whatever.
Way more efficient. Yeah, that's a way better
honestly, system. Yeah, and it's also more years. It's 6 years of law school, at least, usually a little bit more. But yeah, basically what happened was I was, in this path of like basically using the internet mostly to read about thinkers and like being on forums, reading about what people thought about those thinkers. And I was actually in a program, in an exchange program, like working on my summer vacation from law school, like working here in the US at a ski resort. I was a lift operator. And I was in the US. I was working in Lake Tahoe, and I was listening. Was the very early days of like podcasts or whatever they called them back then. And I like the player in the website, whatever. And I was just googling things, something to listen to while I did like some tasks that I had to do at home, and I just put on this show or whatever it was. I don't even remember what it was. And anyway, the host mentioned Atlas Shrugged, and kind of like like mentioned like something related to the Bible, because it's the second most. They said something like it's the second most influential book after the Bible or something like that in America, and how that was kind of like weird or I'm not sure they put it as a contradiction, but that kind of like sparked focus on me, because I was also like on this path of like being, I was raised a Catholic. Not my parents were not hardcore Catholic. In fact, my dad was not really a believer it was agnostic, let's say. But I was in Catholic school. I had been in Catholic school, and I was like, I don't buy this anymore. And that sparked my interest. So what I did was, and I am sorry, but I did download a PDF of Atlas Shrugged back then, because I was about to leave the States. I did not have time to go buy the book, and I read Atlas Shrugged on my desktop computer, and it took me forever, and it was a pain like for my eyes, like to read like in the computer, seeing on the desktop, it was just terrible, and it took me forever. I was also dealing with law school, lots of homework, lots of studying to do. So that didn't have that much of an impact. Atlas, the first time I read it, didn't have that much of an impact to me. I did love, what I loved the most actually was Francisco's speech on money. Mm-hmm. And that really did have an influence on me. That kind of like planted a seed that I wanted to know more about this lady. Then, read some other things if they were available. And then like shortly after, I went to my local library and local bookstore, and I found The Virtue of Selfishness. I was like, oh, this is cool. Like, this is the same lady. I'm gonna like, this is something like, this is a very intriguing title as well. So I just, grabbed the book and I read it so fast, and I just blew my mind. So The Virtue of Selfishness is what did it for me. And from then on, I just started consuming every single thing I could from Ayn Rand.
What do you remember about that reading of the first time you read Virtue of Selfishness? Any particular points or essays or things that jumped out at you as really crystallizing what was appealing?
The objective ethics, it's still to this day one of my favorite essays by her. But overall, and this is, I know, kind of like a cliche answer, but the fact that she's saying that altruism, contrary to popular belief, is actually evil, and here's why, and here's like all these explanation from, you know, metaphysics to epistemology and then ethics, like why that is the case, and why rational selfishness is actually what we need to practice in order, you know, to be happy for, you know, that was to me, because I was always under the impression that, okay, altruism is virtue, like it's virtuous, like more altruism is morality. And
Right.
I had been reading these thinkers that kind of challenge it, but like no one really challenged it to the level that Ayn Rand did. And that completely blew my mind. And it actually did not put me off. Like a lot of people are put off by that notion. It did not to me. Like it kind of made sense to me. It took me a long time to really understand what she was saying, like years. But it made a lot of sense to me. And I connected that because I was so immersed, you know, in the situation in my country and crisis here and there, that I immediately connected to the politics, which of course she does in the same book. But I was like, this is it. Like this is the key. Like this morality that we're holding, and we are like, we treat it as if it was like the metaphysically given, which is not, of course, but we treat it that way, like it cannot be changed. It is what it is. This is actually what's having all these other consequences, like politically and in the lives of people, and not even politically, but like, why are people so unhappy around me? Because people were really freaking unhappy. And that was the answer. And so that to me, like observing that code of morality being like taken so seriously around me, and the you know, the consequences of it, I was like, this woman is absolutely 100% right. So that was most impactful to me.
So then I want to turn to like leaving. I was very proud that when I was in my early 20s, I left the state that I grew up in to go work somewhere else. I find it unfathomably admirable, anybody who leaves their country behind. So take me into that thought process where you start thinking, yeah, I'm going to go live, at least for a time. I don't know if you knew from the beginning that you wanted to live long-term in the US, but how did that come about? And, you know, what was the sort of like, you know, pro-con list going on in your head when you were contemplating that move?
So since I was a little kid, I was always kind of like enamored with the United States. I literally, I cannot recall a time in my life where I wasn't looking up to America. And of course, when I was a kid, I didn't really know why. It just seemed like a really cool place to live. But and this is something that I don't quite remember. My mom tells me when I was like, I don't know, 4 or like 5 maybe, I used to watch this show called Babar the Elephant.
Right.
I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he lived in Hollywood. And I would like love to watch it because he lived in Hollywood. And I would tell my mom, someday I'm gonna live in Hollywood, and I would pronounce it like really weird. And I was like, because Hollywood is so cool, and it's like, stuff like that. And then like growing up a little bit, I started like I paid attention to the know the news in the U.S. and because the U.S. is everywhere, by the way. Like it's not like, you know, here in America we don't get a ton of news from other countries. In everywhere else, basically, we get a ton of news from the U.S. on top of, you know, the local news. So I remember actually watching Bill Clinton when I was a kid, and I was very young, but he was there and he was speaking, and he was, you know, speaking about America and things like that. And I was like, I love this man. I love how he speaks. Not that I love Clinton now, but there was
Sure.
something to what he was saying that was different than what I was used to hearing. Even if, you know, like I said, the standards for what's, you know, left or right or whatever are different in Latin America. Clinton would be very much to the right there, right? like
Sure.
much closer to what I believe now than the politicians back then. And then just American culture in general, I felt more identified with it. When I was growing up, all the music I listened to was American, and the authors.
What were some of your favorites? I'm just
Well,
curious.
I love punk rock, and alternative rock. I also love hip hop, which is not. I haven't met a lot of people in objectivism that love these genres, but I
All
do
right. Well,
like them.
I'm a fan. I mean, we've talked about it in the show before, hip hop in particular, which I am on a mission to not get all objectivists interested in, but let's call it move the goal line.
Yeah.
You move the ball 5 yards down.
And just my mom's aunt lived here actually in Beverly Hills, and she would come visit us and tell us stories about America and everything, and it would be just like, wow, it seems like Wonderland. I don't know, I really want to go there. And then in 97 I went to Disney World, and I, for the first time, leaving going that far away from Argentina with my parents, and I just fell in love with America. And to me, there was something there that was missing in my own country. I could not put my finger on it when I was a kid. Obviously, I can now, but I just fell in love with it. Like, people seemed happier, and it wasn't just because I was in Disney World. It was like I was in Miami, I was in other places. It helps, of course, but
yeah.
And from then on, I just said, like, I kind of want to see if someday I can live here, or at least, come here very often. Like, and I set a goal to myself, like, I want to come here like every year. So then I started doing this called like work and travel programs where, like, as I was in law school in my summer vacation, which is winter here, I would come to work as a Lyft operator at a ski resort in Lake Tahoe. And I did that for 3 years. And then I stopped because there was kind of a delay in my studies, because I was supposed to be studying for law school in the summer, and instead I was working here in the US. But though that experience, like living like 4 or 5 months here, that kind of like said it. I was like, yeah, I really do want to live here. I feel way more comfortable here for a variety of reasons. So I set my mind to it, basically, and I started working towards a goal. And it was in 2015 when, kind of like in my mind, I really sealed the deal, because I was like, okay, what am I going to do here? Am I going to be a lawyer here? That sounds, I need to go to law school again or sit for the bar. That sounds kind of complicated. But in early 2015, Googling Ayn Rand and trying to find more stuff by her, I encountered the Ayn Rand Institute. No, wait, this was 2014. Yes. Early 2014, I encountered the Ayn Rand Institute, and I saw that they had this internship program. And I said, which was, more like studying. It was not like internship as, like working or anything, but it was like way focused on, it was like a 3-week seminar on objectivism.
Yeah. I mean, we used to bring in, the numbers would vary. We'd bring in a bunch of people, and we'd have all the lectures planned out, but then they were supposed to do some work stuff. And I just remember we'd sit around going, what in the world are we going to have them do? And have to like scramble for things we could unload. So there was a work component, but we were all just excited and focused on, having like really interesting people. And as you know, but other people may not, like it was not, hey, you have to agree with Ayn Rand. We wanted intelligent people who were interested in her. And I'm sure, like, I don't remember everybody in your class, but we had often really smart people who were very challenging, and we loved that and encouraged that sort of thing, which I think goes against some of the mythology about what it's like at the Institute. But that was always one of our favorite times of the year, was when we were able to bring groups like that. Which year did you do that again?
2015.
Okay. It all
Yeah.
blurs together in my mind, but
No, I understand. Yeah, but basically, long story short, I'm bringing this up because uh, I applied to the internship, never thought they would, even consider me because my self-esteem was kind of low back then too. And I was like, who the hell is going to like pay attention to me? I'm like on the other side of the world. No one cares, whatever. But I'm going to apply anyway, just in case. And it turns out that I was accepted. And like, I remember the exact day. It was February 13, 2015 when I got the news. And in June, I traveled to California and started the internship. Day two, I was like, this is what I want to do. Like, I always knew I wanted to work with ideas. In fact, like if I had to stay in Argentina, I was going to follow the path of, like, my dad worked in the judicial system, to eventually try and become a judge, like he did. But seeing all the intellectuals there at the time, there was you, there was Langiorno, there was Aaron Smith, there was Steve Simpson, there was Keith Lockridge, and seeing them work and the way that their minds work, even like explaining things to us like in the classes and everything, and seeing the whole environment in the institute that was so intellectual. I was like, I'm so like, this is what I want to do forever as a career, and the only place where I can do it is here in America, because things such as think tanks or educational institutes like the Ayn Rand Institute, is they're not really a thing in Argentina and Latin America in general. Like there are some, but not to the level of professionalism as in America, but also most of them lean to the left.
right.
So I just said, this is what I want to do forever. And I just said, I don't care what it takes. I'm just going to do it. And then 5 years later, I'm here working at the Ayn Rand Institute. And, but that's what made it, and like, knowing that I wanted to work with ideas and that was impossible for me to do in Argentina, especially defending these ideas that I really cared about and I really wanted to defend and advocate for. And reading Ayn Rand and understanding all these things that I had been kind of like feeling about America and why it's so great, and understanding like way more about that, because she's very eloquent in her defense of America. That's what kind of sold me on like, this is where I need to be, not anywhere else in the world. I really want to be in America.
So, I mean, I'm going to broach a subject that I know that you've thought a lot about, but is very complex. But the standard kind of way of thinking about immigration today by the people who are critical of it, or at least they'll say they're critical of illegal immigration, is, well, you should just do it legally. But I think maybe you can give one or two indications of just how it was not a straightforward manner that, okay, well, you wanted to get in and people wanted to bring you in and automatically everything would be fine if you just went through the process. Can you give some indication of what it actually looked like for you to get from where you were to where you are now?
Yes, of course. So it was very rough and very expensive and very painful in general. And I'm not even still done with it 3 years later, right? But I'll tell you this. So I came here on a student visa to pursue a master's of law because I really wanted a degree from an American university. And after that, so I was on what it's called an F1 visa, which is a student visa. I had a really hard time getting that visa, even though, I had all the requisites, I was a great candidate for that visa. But they put me like on this administrative hold for like a month and a half. And I was about to start my semester and I didn't still know that, do I have my visa or not? Like the way it used to be years ago was like on site, they would approve your visa generally if you checked all the right boxes, right? And anyway, so I was like, I had already, paid for my tuition and everything at USC, which was where I was going to study. But I was like, I don't know if I can come. My visa hasn't been approved yet. And then, like, on the nick of time, it was approved, and I was able to come here and do my master's. And then when I finished my master's, the government gives you an option that you can apply for a work permit where you can work for a year in an area related to the subject that you studied in your master's. So I did that. Everything went smoothly. I got that work permit, and I was hired by the Ayn Rand Institute back then. And then because ARI wanted to bring me a little bit more like long term after, and not let that year expire, because I would have to go back home. They applied for me for an H-1B visa, which is a visa for specialized workers, professionals that want to work at a lawyer, for instance, or, all these tech people at Silicon Valley that have degrees are on this kind of visa. But it was really, really complicated, and it was really such a pain.
It's not like you just fill out a form and send it in,
exactly.
Right?
It's very expensive. It's very complicated, and it has all these things, all these strings attached to it that make it really hard for you to not kind of like fall in the trap of abandoning your petition unintentionally, or falling in the trap of like risking them not approving your work permit, your visa. So something really sad happened to me, and sometimes I tell this story, and this is what tons of immigrants go through every year. So basically, when you apply for an H-1B visa, and this is also true of when you're waiting for instance, for your green card to be approved, you cannot leave the country. Because if you leave the country, if you want to travel outside of the US, your petition, your application for a visa will be deemed abandoned by the government. So you can exit the country, but you cannot come back in. It's going to be really hard, for you to, like, refile all your paperwork, and they will probably say no because you didn't show enough interest to stay in the country in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So what happened to me was like, I was in the midst of this thing, applying for this visa, and I was in this period where I could not travel. And in that period, my dad got really, really sick with cancer.
Oh no.
He was sick with cancer before, but then he had a surgery, he beat it, but then he had it came back, and I was here stuck in the US, and the doctors told him, you have like a couple months, 3 months, 4 months to live. And when I found out the news, I was like, I'm leaving everything. I'm gonna go be with my dad, in his last days. So, but it turns out, asking my lawyer at the time, that it would be really complicated. I could ask for a permission or something, but they were not granting them. It would take a while for them to grant them, and there was absolutely no guarantee that I could come back, that they would actually admit me back into the United States back then. So I was like, I don't care. I'm going to go be with my dad. And basically what happened was, I had a phone conversation with my dad, and he told me, if you come here, I'm going to send you like right back. Like, you cannot abandon everything you worked for, all your dreams. Like, you have been wanting this since you were a kid, and you have worked so hard in your master's and getting this job at this place where you really wanted to work for so long. I cannot let you come here and abandon all that for me. I'm fine. Nothing's going to change. Unfortunately, my time has come, and that there's no change in that. So he said, just, stay there and do what you have to do there, and let's talk until the time comes, and I don't want you to abandon all your dreams, not just professional dreams, but personal dreams as well, living in America. So I had to make that decision, and I could not go see my father, and he eventually passed away in July 2018. And it was really painful for me, obviously, because I had to make that really tough decision. My dad kind of told me what he wanted, and I wanted to do what he wanted as well. But that rule makes absolutely no sense, and there's no reason why that should be the case. And there's no reason why, if you request an emergency travel permit, that you shouldn't get it, which is the case, that the things that are happening right now, and in the last few years, where immigration has gotten a little bit tougher. And this is something that happens to immigrants every day. For instance, people that are waiting for their green cards to be approved, they need a special work permit, and they need a special travel permit, to be able to work and travel outside of the United States as their green card gets processed. But the problem is that those permits take forever, and meanwhile you cannot work and you cannot travel. So if you have a family emergency, much like I did, you have to request a special permit that I have not heard of one person getting it in the last couple of years at least. And you cannot work, and you cannot apply for government benefits either. So you're kind of stuck in this position where you're like, I can't work and I can't travel, and how am I going to make a living? How am I going to live? I can't pay rent. And that's very common. And basically what people end up doing is either leaving to go back to their home countries and be able to work, or because they have a family emergency or something, or they end up either, applying for government benefits, which ultimately make them ineligible for a green card, or they end up working illegally and they get caught. And that obviously, will, their green card applications will be rejected. And that's for people that, do things that they call it, the right way.
Right.
And it's a different that basically setting immigrants for failure. And you have to be really, really determined to live here. And even if you are, there could be a case I actually, because of this work permit stuff and whatever, I was out of work. I was unable to work legally in the United States for around 4 months. Between when my work permit expired and then the new one came in. And if I hadn't had savings, I don't know what I would have done. I would be in the street. It's a very complicated situation, and I couldn't work for that time. And I was fortunate that the Emirates Institute, my employer, took me back too, because when you lose an employee, you kind of want to, it makes sense for employers to fill that gap with someone else, but they waited for me, thankfully. But yeah, it's really complicated, and things go, my story is, it's sad, and for me it was really one of the worst things that ever happened to me. But there are people that have it way worse, people with children here in the United States, that get deported, and the children have to stay here, and who are the children going to stay with? Again, we're not even talking about, quote, illegal immigrants. I'm not a huge fan of that phrase, but we're talking to people that are trying to do things legally and the way that the system is supposed to work. But this is a system that, like I said, sets immigrants for failure.
I mean, the whole issue I find difficult, and I hadn't even heard your whole story before, and it breaks my heart, but it angers me so much. And then if you think, what do we lose out on by that? And it's incalculable. If you think of if there had been those barriers to Ayn Rand coming here, how much the world would have missed out on. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. I can't end this interview without asking about the painting or drawing behind you. So it looks like we have, for those listening on podcasts, there's this ridiculously fun looking, is it a painting?
Yeah, it's a painting.
Scrooge McDuck. We got the Monopoly Man. We got Richie Rich. And I don't know what the green character is.
Those are bags of dollars.
It's just bags
Of
of
money.
dollars. What's the story behind that? Because that is amazing.
Yeah, no. So those three are actually playing poker. My partner loves to play poker. So there's the side for him. But for me, this is from an artist, one of my favorite. I like street art a lot. Another unpopular opinion. But this guy is called Alec Monopoly. And he has all this art that is geared towards, putting out there, signs of prosperity and money, and it's kind of like a node to capitalism. And of course, there are the ones that say like he's mocking capitalism, but he's never said one way or the other.
Yeah.
And actually, like his lifestyle is pretty capitalistic. So I just love his art. Like he's this kind of like portraying money as something good, and people, the signs of prosperity and wealth. And I saw that painting, and I just really liked it.
Oh yeah, I mean,
So
I'm deeply regretful now that A, I don't have one, and B, I don't have a wall, or at least I could stick it on these slanted ceilings. So one of the things that has been really interesting now that you've launched this newsletter, first of all, how can people sign up for it? And I highly encourage everybody to sign up for your newsletter.
they can sign up by going to my website. It's agustinacid.com/newsletter.
And I'll link to it in the show notes. But one of the things you've done that I really like, and I wish more people would do, is you've kind of just shared sort of where you're trying to grow, the obstacles you've encountered, whether it's like different challenges with writing. I think your last one was about, writing of the past that makes me cringe, and how I've kind of grown to view things in a different way, which I can totally relate to. Other things, I think you talked about, like being self-conscious about your accent, or like all of these things that you're trying to overcome. What do you wish you had known about just communication, 5 years ago, that has really been useful to you as you've grown as a writer, as a speaker, since you've been making a career out of this?
Well, so many things, but I wish I had read The Art of Nonfiction earlier by Ayn Rand. And I wish I had, because I actually read it and not took the course, Objective Communication by Dr. Leonard Peikoff. I wish I had, read those books way earlier. That would have changed a lot for me. But part of it is, for me, I used to love writing, but not love writing. I used to love the final product. That I finished an article, here's the final, but the process was excruciating for me. And what made that process actually enjoyable, which is not 100% enjoyable yet, because I suffer a lot, sometimes when writing, not sometimes, but pretty much with everything I write. But I actually enjoy it. It's, reading The Art of Nonfiction by Ayn Rand, and like knowing her process, which turns out that works for me as well, like, because it's so logical. And that, like, following her process and taking a class in the Objectivist Academic Center, the writing class. The Objectivist Academic Center, for those who don't know, is a program, an intellectual training program by the Ayn Rand Institute. I took the writing class there, and our textbook, let's say, was The Art of Nonfiction, and it changed everything for me, and it made the writing process so enjoyable. And first I was like just about writing. Then when I started, at least in English, right? So I have two personalities, one in English and one in Spanish. That's fascinating. Kind of that's half a joke. I'm only half joking. But also when I started,
what would be, I mean, you don't have to go into like ever loving detail about it, but I'm just curious as to, do you think it's like you can kind of be more expressive and like in the moment when you're in your native language, and there's kind of a filter that comes in English? What is the kind of split personality that you think arises from those two?
So I'm not that's something that I'm trying to figure out, and I actually have been having a couple conversations with people at ARI about it. Basically, if you watch me speak in Spanish, even though if you have no idea what I'm saying, you will feel like all these like confidence and these, body language that is different. I use my hands way more, like I gesture a lot, but I'm not like just moving my hands just because, like,
Right.
it's just like it makes sense. Like it's like a visual aid. And where like in English I'm way more, I hold back a lot. I'm not entirely sure why that is. It's probably because I feel way more confident speaking Spanish. Obviously it's my native language and I have
Sure.
tons of practice, presenting in Spanish. In fact, like, in law school in Argentina, all of our final exams are oral exams, like just you and the professor, and you have to present all like 50 final exams that you have to take. So that's good practice.
Yeah, I mean, Leonard Peikoff actually in his some, I don't know that it was his formal education course, but he gave a lecture on education. His view is that that's a much superior way to test. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So yeah, like I'm trying to almost literally translate that the confidence and the way I come across a personality from Spanish to English, and I am still not sure what it takes. It's part of what I'm learning. The same happens in writing, and it's kind of frustrating for me because in Spanish I'm a great writing when it comes to like prose and the way the choice of words and how the article flows. I am way better in Spanish than I am in English, and I get really frustrated when I want to write like an article, let's say a beautiful article, because it reads so well, and the choice of words is so good that you actually say this was really enjoyable to read. Besides, the points that this person is making,
right.
The argument, and I can't do it in English yet, and it's really frustrating to me. And it's this thing. I'm not sure what it is. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm asking people who are bilingual, trilingual, or whatever, if they have the same problem. Some of them do, some of them don't. But
Well, that's
it's
the
something
thing.
that
Like,
I'm determined to overcome. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, I hope. I mean, I think you will. Like, one of the things I've noticed, and I think one of the reasons I've been so excited with the newsletters, because I can see you actively working on, which is just making it more you and your voice more you. And I was writing, the other day on my newsletter about the kind of process that I underwent to form my style, and I can see that same kind of like pushing yourself, to really inject more of you into your writing. And so I'm very confident that you will solve it. But what I wanted to say is, once you do, you need to go back and tell everybody else who has that problem, like, all right, here's what I went through. Because
For sure.
my biggest weakness intellectually is language. Like I never made it through a single class in language. In fact, I majored in business mostly because it didn't have a language requirement. And so I admire so much people who do conquer that feat. And so, like, yeah, solve that and sell it to everybody is kind of a side gig. I highly encourage that.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, part of what I'm trying to do, with my newsletter is kind of like document this journey for me to become like an effective intellectual. And the everything I go through and what this journey looks like, and the obstacles and everything. And whenever I figure something out, you can be sure I'm going to be putting it on that newsletter and just or just telling people how to overcome it, because it seems to be, from what I've heard from people, I'm not the only one who has that issue. So
well, and I just think like if I had that thought record over the period in which I was, learning, and obviously I hope I'm still learning, but that kind of major developmental period, like that would be such a gold mine. And I mean, I do have, a bunch of my old notes, and it'd be interesting to share some of those and try to hunt down, some of them. But like, to have that in real time, obviously for you, it'll be a benefit, but like for everybody else to be able to see that and for you to extract lessons from it one day is going to be just really amazing. And that's why I'm so big on, people don't need to wait until they know everything and are masters of everything in order to create really valuable content. Like seeing people go through the journey that you're going on while you're going on it, and you can go on it with them. That's amazing. And then in retrospect, people have like pointed out, how awesome would it be if like Jeff Bezos had like, a weekly YouTube show as he was trying to build Amazon? Like how much would we pay for like, a Steve Jobs' journal from, daily insights from building Apple? Like, these are, they can be really revolutionary if we're getting a lot of really creative people to do that. So, well, that's I think you're doing a lot of exciting, stuff. What's kind of like your main area of, I know that long-term you're interested in this issue of immigration, but in terms of like any specific projects that you have on the horizon that you're at work on, or is it more just like focused on a long-range mission at this point?
No, they can focus. Basically, I want to become this expert in immigration law and be able to, analyze immigration policy from an objectivist perspective. This perspective, of course, informed by Ayn Rand's ideas. And I'm still in that journey. I'm still learning a lot and pursuing a certificate, to learn more about immigration law. I already, when I was doing my master's at USC, I already took classes on immigration and everything, but I still need more. And I still need to study more philosophy.
Well, let me ask you that. I know we're over a few minutes, but this is fascinating to me. So I'm right now currently doing, I'm going through Leonard Peikoff's book, Objectivism, the Philosophy of Ayn Rand, section by section, because I know that there's a lot of people who are really trying to learn the philosophy in more depth, and it just pays such dividends in whatever your field you're interested in. But where do you see as sort of the areas where you're either struggling or you see there's just like a lot of exciting potential to learn more? Do you have any issues that are on your radar screen like that really excite you or challenge you?
Well, the entire philosophy, I've been studying for many years now, but the entire philosophy is still very challenging to me. And it's interesting you mentioned the Oprah thing, because I actually, part of my things to do next week is to start rereading Oprah for the third time now, and do it along with your podcast episodes.
Oh, so great.
That's going to be interesting. But the area that really interests me a lot is just in general politics, like political philosophy. And reading, I have the Foundations of a Free Society, edited by Greg Salmieri and Robert Mayhew, that came out, I believe it was last year. And I read most of the essays in that book, and I noticed, I still have a lot of studying to do here. And of course, like that relates directly to what I want to do, in the area of the law and immigration policy in general. So that's something I want to, but of course, like everything, it's like a domino, let's say, like everything connects to everything. So I need to go back to, metaphysics, epistemology. There are some, like many questions I still have about that. So that's why I'm like in this mission of, like, I need to reread Oprah and really, really understand the things that are still kind of like unclear to me.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a never-ending journey. I certainly, for me, the biggest cash value or area where I want to, I think there's just so much room for growth is really studying more contrasting philosophies, because it just leads to so many interesting questions that then shed light on your ideas. And so that's sort of that someday I will have the time to do it. I'm doing it a little bit in conjunction with the Oprah thing. I have my collection of Hume right now as I go through metaphysics and epistemology, but lots more of that to come. Well, Agustina, this was a lot of fun. Thank you so much for coming on. And we already told people, sign up for Agustina's email list
it will be linked to in the show notes. And hope you come back at some point and tell us about the milestones that you've hit in your journey.
Right. Thank you so much, Don, for having me.